So we're going to talk about member experience, things to think about when we're reading your application or when we're looking at how your program's designed, what experiences your members are going to have, because it's not only helping you and your beneficiaries, you're also mutually, beneficial. The program and the AmeriCorps program in particular is beneficial to the AmeriCorps members when it comes to gaining skills or their benefits, etc. I'm going to talk real quick about the member service and what a term of service is. I know that a lot of people are like, well, how much do we pay them? How long is their term, etc. So we'll talk about that. And then quickly about supervising your members and what our expectation would be when you're hosting a member or members. So some organizations on here I know are interested in one or two. Some what we call anchor organizations or intermediaries would have a different design and they would have 10 plus members. So there's no one right way to do AmeriCorps, but there are a lot of points to talk about when it comes to hosting a member. So AmeriCorps members, who are they? They're giving their time, right, and their commitment. They're committing whether it's a year, whether it's 6 months, whether it's 3 months, whether it's summer. They're giving their time and talent. You do interview them, you place them, you choose them to help the community. Sometimes you're recruiting them from out of town, across the country. Sometimes they're your volunteer pool. Sometimes they're members of the community. So either way, they have some time and talent that they're willing to give and they're interested in giving to the program or to your organization. All ages, all backgrounds. With AmeriCorps State, there is a lower age limit. I believe it's 17. There's no upper age limit. So they're gaining valuable experience. They're gaining training. They're getting training from AmeriCorps, the federal agency, from the commission, and from your organization. And then AmeriCorps just in general provides a lot of benefits to members, including an education award, training, like I said, different types of training. We do something called Life After AmeriCorps because folks, as soon as they do their term, they need to find, employment or they're going back to school. So there's lots of different types of training, beginning, middle, end, supplemental health insurance, depending on their term type, loan deferment, and childcare. So what do they do? I think that's a big question. What can my members do? What can't they do? There is a list of what we call, and I'll get into it a little bit later, called prohibited activities, where members can't do X, Y, and Z. It's very explicit about what they can and can't, what they can't do. But a lot of folks are like, well, what can they do? So down at the bottom, you'll see members help solve community problems through direct service. So if you're interested in having AmeriCorps members do direct service, AmeriCorps State is right for you. If you're looking for someone who's behind the scenes, who's helping you develop your volunteer management system, helping you develop your marketing campaign, helping you develop your fundraising campaign, working on data, that's capacity building, that's indirect service, and that's AmeriCorps Vista. So what we're offering is a grant program for AmeriCorps State. So just some examples of what they can do. They tutor, mentor adults in ESL. They run after school programs. They develop lesson plans designed to improve needed pre-vocational skills. So we have members who work in K through 12 after school and in the schools, providing health information to vulnerable populations. We have a new program, 3 new programs in the public health AmeriCorps program, and they're community health workers, and they're doing that kind of work, fostering partnerships for constructive community involvement, and conducting workshops with underserved related to building personal and financial assets. So we also have programs that work with immigrants, and they work with citizenship classes. They do financial literacy classes. So it runs the gamut what AmeriCorps members can do. Mostly we're asking, what's your community need? And then how are the AmeriCorps members going to address that with a direct service? So this is what we would be asking you. If you look at the previous RFAs, requests for proposals, or excuse me, requests for applications, you'll see that these are a lot of the questions that we ask. And like I said in the beginning, every program is different, and so every answer is going to be different. There are some standardized ways in which we work with members, but based on your organization, based on your organizational culture, your board, maybe any additional benefits outside of what AmeriCorps provides that you can provide. So we just ask, what does the member experience look like at your organization? You can model that after what an employee, experience looks like. We do onboarding, we do training. They're part of our culture. We do outings. They're involved in X, Y, and Z. they're remote or they're, at brick and mortar. So we want to know exactly what the member experience. What's going to happen when you interview a member and they start that first day, and then what happens during their term until they end. That's going to look different every organization depending on how big or small you are. How will AmeriCorps members, as a result of their service, have opportunities to develop as leaders? This is a national service program, and so they're not volunteers, they're not employees. We're interested in developing leaders. We're interested in workforce development. We're interested in, if you're an AmeriCorps alum, that means something on your resume after you're done your service. How will AmeriCorps members gain skills as a result of the training and service that can be utilized and valued by future employers after their term is completed? I think I kind of answered that. That's something that we'd be interested. There are some programs in our portfolio that provide certifications, or so they would at the end of their term be certified in like mental health training, or they would I think program that works within the environmental field, they are certified in using like hand tools and chainsaws, and so that's obviously very specific. But if you are able to provide something like that to your members, it's just going to give you the ability to recruit more members and better members, I say, more qualified members, and keep them and retain them. So it's not just about recruiting, it's about retaining the member over the course of the service. Another questions we ask, how do you plan to recruit your members from the geographic or demographic communities in which the program operate? I'll tell you, I am from New Jersey and did my service in rural Virginia in Lee County. And I think I brought something to the county, but I wasn't from that area. And so there's something to be said about recruiting someone who's in the community, who has their foot in the door at different organizations or knows the demographic that you're working with. That just brings something extra to the program. With Vista, it's a lot of national recruitment, but with AmeriCorps State, because there's no relocation allowance, and members, sometimes it's hard to find housing. We all know that. Usually we're recruiting from the demographic and the communities that we're working with. How will your program foster an inclusive service culture? Too many times we see this happen where members show up to an organization and no one knows what they do. And they're treated differently, they're othered, and then they leave. They leave because they don't feel like they're part of the organization. So ensuring that there's a service culture, that there's a culture in general that's identified and that they're a part of it. Which speaks to this next one. Does your organization, or will your organization, if you don't already, seek to create a supportive and safe environment to ensure that the programming is culturally and community appropriate? That's just super important. And so we want to know, and I think it's probably on another slide, DEI is super important to AmeriCorps. It's important to us, diversity, equity, inclusion. And so do you have at your organization a DEI plan, or what ways do you see diversity and inclusion as important at your organization? All right. Any questions about that first part? Cool. We'll move on. So member service. So what are you applying for? What exactly? We know what they can do. We list their activities in our grant. We write a position description, but technically, what exactly am I applying for? So, excuse me. AmeriCorps members are individuals enrolled for a specific service term. A service term is the number of hours that they have to complete in order to get their education award between two dates. So our grant year starts usually on September 1st and ends August 31st. We do have some education programs that start a little bit beforehand, and we have some other programs that end a little bit after. I say to say, we define, members have to do a certain number of hours to get their education award. And the largest number of hours they'll have to do is 1,700. That's what we consider a full-time member. And members can successfully complete that term within 10 to 12 months. Excuse me. So their service term would be September 1st through August 31st of the next year, and they do 1,700 hours. And then we'll get into what you pay them. But that's their term. 300-hour terms are usually about summer terms. So it's really a math equation when you come down to it. How many hours can they do in a week, or how much service is there for them to do in that week? And then dividing, let's say, 25, 40 hours into 300, and that you'll see how many weeks they'll need to do their service term. They're engaged in national service and play a unique role in community organizations to address unmet needs. I think we've addressed that. And then they're explained, their service is explained in an agreement signed before the term begins. So we have a number of templates on our website, but they do enter into a contractual agreement with your organization that says, hey, this is what I'm going to get paid. These are, potential disciplinary actions if I don't adhere to the rules. Here's what I'm going to receive at the end of my term. Here's what I'm supposed to do every day. So there is a contract that we put into place that outlines all those things. And then I think I have said this word 1,000 times, training. They receive training on how their service is impactful. So there is something called the terms and conditions, which I know you probably, if you've run a grant before, understand what those are. But it outlines the types of trainings that AmeriCorps members have to receive. So they need an onboarding, and then an on-site orientation, and then a life after AmeriCorps. And then everything else in between is just, additive, to their service and to the benefit that they're bringing you. Excuse me. So in 2 weeks, we're going to talk about the budget, and the term MSY is going to be important. It equals a member service year. That's what MSY stands for. And it's equal to 1 full-time position. So 1 MSY, like I said, is 1,700 hour position, 1,700 hours. Reiterating that the term of service begins on this date, ends on this date. They're serving X number of hours. Like they're serving a full-time, and there's different types. Quarter time, you see here, the service term, full-time, 3/4 time, half-time, reduced half-time, quarter time, minimum time, abbreviated. So they're serving in that service term, and they have to do a minimum number of hours. So if you look at the chart, you'll see the different service terms outlined. You'll see the minimum number of hours. I will say 1,700 hour positions are pretty difficult to manage, because if you don't recruit them by a certain time, they're not going to have enough time to finish their hours. So we see a lot of organizations utilizing 3/4 time positions. If you need full-time service, like a tutoring or mentoring program. Half-time is a great position. Find that those are really interesting for people. I wouldn't say anything is easier to recruit over another. It just depends on where your program's located, and the demographic that you're, trying to apply. Like if you're working with students, a 1,700 hour position where they have to do 35 hours a week is not going to be successful. So then you'll see in the middle column, the MSY. So that's the weight that these service terms have value. They'll see full-time, 1,700 is 1 MSY. And then you'll see below that 3/4 time is weighted at 0.7 MSY. So when we start talking about the cost per MSY, if you apply for 2 half-time positions, 0.5 plus 0.5 is 1. So that's 1 MSY. So we add them together, and then we get the number of MSY that you're applying for, and then we multiply it by a factor, and that's the amount of grant funds that you're eligible to receive. Excuse me. So there is a minimum living allowance for full-time members and a maximum. The other ones don't have a minimum. I've never, in Virginia, seen a program that does not offer a living allowance to a member. I don't think it's a smart idea. Usually people are not doing this. I mean, they're doing it because they're interested in national service, but there has to be a benefit to folks to make this commitment. And usually that's a living allowance. Right now, AmeriCorps has it at about $11 an hour, and they're trying to go up to 13. And we do have a program that pays closer to the max living allowance, but that's few and far between. Most of our programs are paying around 20 to 25 for a full-time member, and then pro rata based on the lesser MSY.
And Samantha, we have a question from Sandra who asks, how many members are you required to host? I thought on the last call that it was stated that you have to host a minimum of 10.
So there's no hard and fast requirement for how many you have to have. In the RFA, the verbiage is that the Service Commission doesn't require, but we are strongly encouraging you to have 10 MSY and or 10 members. So I think that's what it is, or five MSY and 10 members, some combination thereof. You don't have to have 10 members. We've funded programs with 5 members, but the work to monitor a program like that is similar to monitoring a program that has, 20 members. There's still the same rules and regulations and compliance and organizational capacity that has to happen. So, we're not bound by the 10 members. I will tell you that the process for getting an award, you have to go through a scoring panel, an evaluation panel, and then they recommend you for funding or not funding. So if they don't think that 5 is a worthy cause based on your program design, then you would get a lower score. But if they think your program's great and it's smart to start with 5 members based on your application and what you put in it, then we would fund you. Or we would recommend, maybe you could take on 1 or 2 more members based on your organizational capacity, because we also do a risk assessment. Okay, hopefully that answered your question. Great. And then at the end of their service term, based on the number of hours that they do, they have to complete their term. They have to complete their hours, and then they get an education award. And I believe it's the value of the Pell Grant. So next year it's going to be a little bit over 7,000. So. All right. These are just some benefits. I know we started a little bit late. We have about 6 minutes left. You can provide health insurance for your members, but if you have full-time members, you have to offer them health insurance. There's different nuanced rules around these different benefits, so I'm not going to get into it. But some benefits are provided directly by AmeriCorps, some are provided by your grant. So living allowance by your grant, healthcare coverage by your grant, childcare by AmeriCorps, and the education award by AmeriCorps. And I'll send these slides out so you can read more if you're interested. I did talk a little bit about the specific terms and conditions. Essentially, this is outlining like your whole grant about how you need to operate it. We do have Virginia specific terms and specific guidance, but it's just more specific based on these terms and conditions. So in the prohibited activities, members can't do political activity. Bipartisan activity, they can vote, but it has to be on their own time, right? So they can't rally for whoever is supporting your program on AmeriCorps time and claim hours for that. Religious activity is another one. They can't hold church, or I don't even know exactly how to say that, but they can go to church. Obviously, everyone is a free American, but they can't claim hours for that. What else? They can't help with abortion services. Obviously, they can do that on their own time. Can't do it and claim hours. So we talked about the member service agreement. There's member positions. There's supervision and limits on time spent on training. Requirements for reporting slot conversions and record keeping. This is the kind of stuff that if you go into a planning grant, we go over step by step by step by step, and then make sure that you have the policies to back it up once you run an operational program. Supervising your members, what does it look like? I'm not sure exactly the gamut of who's on the call and what position you hold, or if you supervise staff, but supervising an AmeriCorps member is a lot like that. So you have orientation and training, you have transparency, continuous feedback and improvement. We do require, especially for full-time members, a mid-year and an end-of-year evaluation. In order to get their education award, they have to satisfactorily complete their term. So that's important to have everything in writing and documented. Clear expectations. We have a position description template that we require, and it outlines exactly what the member is going to do. They feel valued and respected. You have regular meetings. We encourage you to meet with your member, especially in the beginning. There are different models based on how big your core is, and then your organizational structure based for supervision. But meeting with your member or members is critical. And then every member has to be assigned a supervisor, even if it's a core of members, 4 or 5 that have one supervisor, as long as everyone has a supervisor, and it doesn't necessarily need to be the program director. And then all supervisors should receive training before members start. We have templates, we have other programs, we have best practices, so you wouldn't necessarily have to create your member orientation or your supervisor training from scratch. But it's vitally important that they receive some sort of training in order to supervise members. And then this is just what you would want to think about as you are interested in writing an application or thinking about hosting members. How will AmeriCorps members receive sufficient guidance and support from their supervisor? Detail a supervisional structure for members. How will you train AmeriCorps member or supervisors? And then how will you handle member complaints or grievances? We added that one recently because no one was really addressing it, but it does happen. Some members complain. I mean, and some programs are not great at responding to those complaints. So we're interested to see how your organization, because I'm sure you've maybe had a volunteer or an employee complain, what kinds of things do you do, and what structures do you have in place? So just getting ready, this speaks to what we'll talk about next week, which is organizational capacity and our expectations. You're detailing the roles, responsibilities, the structure of the staff that provide oversight to the program and monitoring of the program, because this is a federal grant. And some programs receive upwards of $1 million. And so we have to do our due diligence when we're working with members and we're working with federal dollars. We're interested to see if you facilitated, partnered, or participated in educational workforce development programs before. So this is not just a grant to do your programming, it's really a people grant. So we're providing living allowance and supervisory and staff salaries for you to work with members, to work with people. So we're interested to see how you've done that at your program. And then the applicants' definitions of diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility demonstrate that you're engaged in activities related to those things. Clear that staff have managed programming in some form or fashion. If you've never operated a program before, this is not for you. I would go get some programmatic experience and then maybe incorporate AmeriCorps into that fabric. If you have alum on staff, extra points. I think it's amazing that and we don't actually get extra points, but it's just a real telltale sign that you probably know a little bit more about what you're doing and how the program works, because it can be complicated sometimes. So your roles are clear and outlined, who's working with what, who's working with who. Is there support staff available? So we have this thing called covered staff, where you can pay with part of the federal dollars, part of someone's salary. But that doesn't mean that everybody who supports the grant, like your financial officer or your accountant or HR, needs to be in the grant. But we're interested to see like what support systems at your organization exist. And then naming the staff and their experience is super important. Okay. Oh, wow. I'm ending right on the dot, and we will have time for questions. But the next steps, we'll talk about keeping your program in order. So organizational capacity, what does compliance of an AmeriCorps program look like a compliance plan? What would be our expectation when we're doing, when we're looking at the organizational structure? The question that we get asked a lot is, what type of staffing do you require when running an AmeriCorps program? Like, how much time does a program director have to put into the program? So we'll address that kind of stuff. You know, if you have a program director at your organization who's going to put 10% on this grant, it's just not going to work out. So anyway, any questions about members? Everyone knows exactly what the member's going to do. Oh, who covers health insurance? Your grant would. You would put money in your grant to cover health insurance if they're full-time. If they're not full-time, then you don't have to. And there's a couple different ways to work out health insurance. You can either do it through the exchange and provide them like X number of dollars. That could be your policy. You'd have to have a policy. You can put them on your organizational's health insurance, which I don't think anyone does. There is something called the Core Network, which provides health insurance for AmeriCorps members, but I believe it's pretty expensive. I think it's like $300 a month. And then you can do something which I did when I was in Roanoke. I provided up to $100 per month reimbursement to go through the exchange for at least a bronze level plan, a very specific policy. So that's what we did.